You know, I don't want a bunch of remote, unaccountable, entrenched MPs choosing the leader either. I can understand why people would be averse to that. But if you have MPs who really have to answer to their local riding, then I think that is a very democratic model of choosing the leader. So I do think we have to abolish this business of having to get the signature, amongst other things, of having to get the signature of the party leader. I think we have to look at some way of getting a proper membership role in these ridings. You know, if the parties can't police themselves in this, I have no problem at all with the idea of you know, if you can get past the catch-22 in this argument, of legislating on this. People will protest, oh, parties are private organizations. Well, so are corporations. And we have no problem at all in passing legislation on rules for electing corporate boards of directors and these kinds of things. So I have no problem at all in principle with saying, let's have either some requirement that the members have to have been members for more than 6 months, or even think about moving to a US-style system of registered voters. But some sort of system where we have real elections for local MPs, for the nominee races, so that the MPs then are really legitimate representatives of the party in that riding, and therefore are really able to say no to the party leadership and to exercise some accountability there. I think when it comes to elections, I think we have to be far less tolerant of the idea that people in politics should be able to lie with impunity. Now, I know you've done some experiments here in BC with voter recall and electoral fraud and these kinds of things, and you know, there's a lot of debate to be had about what's the proper model of these things, and sometimes things that sound like good ideas don't work, or they've been made too hard to implement, or what have you. Here's my contribution to it and you know, it may or may not be a good idea, but it's something I've been sort of thinking about. It is the problem I think that we're really facing is not so much that the liars are getting away with it. It's that the politician who wants to tell the truth, who is really honest and sincere, has no way of convincing people now that he is. Because we're all going to look at him and go, yeah, right. And so what happens in private life, in the private sector when this? Well, we have things like bonding. We have things like swearing on affidavits, so because this issue comes up in other businesses, right? Where, you know, I'm a courier and I want people to trust me to take valuable goods. And how do I distinguish myself from the fly-by-nights and the crooks? Well, I bonded. So here's my idea is, and I don't want to have some kind of, you know, political police running around yelling gotcha every time a politician, you know, slips up. You know, so you don't want people playing gotcha on people just because of some casual slip of the lip on the campaign trail. What you want, as I say, is for when candidates really want to impress upon you that they mean it, that they're telling the truth. And here's what I would do is the candidate should be able to say, to opt in to a legal penalty. To say, in releasing my platform today, I invoke Article 9 of the Elections Act. And Article 9 would be some sort of provision that spelled out the legal penalties if what the platform said was just a material misrepresentation of reality, if they were not telling the truth. And it would induce some caution, no doubt, in the way in which platforms were constructed. So they would probably have language that said, you know, we promise to balance the budget unless certain things happen in the economy. Fair enough. You know, that's just due process, due caution. But we would have some sense that there was real consequence if they were just lying through their teeth. And that would certainly, it seems to me, to be an improvement upon the status quo. You may well ask, well, why wouldn't candidates release, why wouldn't they all start doing that? Yeah, they would. There would be a lot of questions asked if you weren't invoking this penalty. Again, I think that's progress. I would also add, you know how in Britain they have experimented with this idea, or not Britain, the United States, of having the candidate come on at the end of an attack ad and say, you know, I'm John McCain and I approve this message. And, you know, it's imperfect, but it imposes a little bit of a discipline in that they have to associate themselves with this appalling ad. I'd take it one step further. And I have no problem, as a rabid free speaker, I have no problem with the idea of saying the candidate should have to voice the ad himself. So those awful words would have to come out of his mouth. And I think that would be... We got to fix the television debates. And I'm involved with a project with Rudyard Griffiths, who you may know, who's was the head of the Dominion Institute, very interested in Canadian history and instituting a greater sense of citizenship. And one of the things that we're working on is to try and fix the debates. And that involves having more of them. I think there should be a debate every week during a campaign. They should be in both official languages, so you can't have an all English, all French debate, because we all know what the French debate becomes. It becomes the Pander du Quebec debate. And no province should be entitled to that kind of thing. We should be watching the debates together. We're quite familiar with simultaneous translation in this country. I think that should be good. So, but have more of them, experiment with different formats, maybe have debates not just between the leaders, but between the finance critics and the foreign affairs critics. But let's construct election campaigns along that spine, if for no other reason than to give us in the media something else to write about other than polls and who's ahead and who's behind. You know, because that's what we're given right now is all of our coverage, or 80% of it is this party's ahead and this party's behind. Oh, this party's ahead and this party's behind. Oh, did we mention that this party's ahead and this party's behind? And then when the candidate has been consistently behind, then the coverage becomes, why are you behind? Why are you losing? Why are you such a loser? If you weren't such a loser, what would you be? And eventually you realize that what we're really trying to do is to see if we can make them cry. And I don't think that's a particularly creative addition to the Democratic arsenal. So let's fix the debates. Let's fix campaign finance. Now, this may not meet as much favor in this room, but I am not an advocate of the campaign subsidy. Partly because I think people should give their own money, not somebody else's money. Partly because I want the parties to be coming back and asking for my money every year rather than coasting on what they did 5 years ago in an election. Partly because we're subsidizing the bloc and subsidizing, I mean, I like a diversity of choices on the campaign trail, but I don't want a sort of an artificial diversity of choices. I want a diversity that actually represents real basis of support in the population. So my model of campaign finance is, let's have one global annual ceiling that each of us faces, whatever amount you want to set it at. And all of your campaign contributions to whatever level of government, to whatever party, to even to third-party advocacy groups, if they're going to be participating in elections, has to come out of that combined pool. So it's kind of self-policing in that the more you give to one party or cause, the less you've got left over to give to others. And what it's really doing is it's kind of, broadly speaking, equalizing, imperfectly, because some people won't be able to get up to the ceiling, but as near as I think free speech and free democracy allows, equalizing our ability to contribute as individuals to election debates. If you imagine, if we all had equal incomes, nobody would worry about money buying elections because we'd all have equal incomes. This is kind of the nearest thing to that I can imagine, and I think it achieves the right balance of allowing people to spend their own money if they so choose to participate in election debates, but without having a complete free-for-all where it isn't that money buys elections, because there's lots of counterexamples where, you know, one side's outspent 13-1 and still wins. But I can tell you, money buys parties. And we don't ever want to go back to the system we had not so long ago, where we had, you know, large corporations getting $100,000 to the Liberal Party of Canada, and by, you know, surprise, surprise, getting millions of dollars in corporate subsidies in return. I won't even say much more than let's fix the electoral system, proportional representation. If we do a lot of other things, this last reform is not on its own enough, but if we do a lot of other things, I will tell you I'm an advocate of mandatory voting. It seems to me it's like jury duty or paying your taxes. It's one of the very few impositions, civic duties that democracy requires of people. But it seems to me you owe your fellow citizens your counsel. You owe them to add to your voice to the national debate about how we should govern ourselves. You can vote none of the above, you can vote monster raving loony, you can spoil your ballot, you can decline your ballot, you can do whatever you like. The only thing you can't do is sit on your duff.
No vote, no tax return.
Maybe, yeah, and that's the thing, is you can look at different ways. It can be a positive incentive rather than a penalty. You know, but it seems to work in Australia where they get 95% turnouts. And as I say, it's not enough on its own. You've got to give people positive reasons to want to vote. But in combination with that, I think it's worth looking at. And then, as I say, I think I probably dealt with the types of things I'd like to see in Parliament to break down the party discipline, to change the way we choose the party leaders, to have smaller cabinets so there's less of an incentive for MPs to whip themselves. Let the speaker rule on closure motions rather than having the government decide when debate has gone on long enough, as they do in Britain. And I'll close just by saying some kind of rule that decides that it will be Parliament that will decide when it's dissolved or prorogued, and not the government of the day.